Well, thank you for the invite.
Yeah.
It's a privilege.
So why don't you go ahead and give people a brief introduction into who you are and your background?
Okay, so I had a pretty mixed school background. There's a bit of music in there that helped us into schools. I went to all types of different schools. Really quite a mixed period. Had a great family, but I ended up as an industrial roofer. And in that time, my brother had joined the parachute regiment. I kind of looked at him, looked at what he was doing, and that kind of fascinated me. And because industrial roofing wasn't going our way, it was in those years when didn't have any safety equipment when I started, and therefore we could do well on price and coverage of areas. They started bringing safety equipment in, but it wasn't well engineered, and it was becoming fairly perilous, but also very, very hard to make viable. Very, very long days, playing a lot of sport, a lot of rugby. So in that, I went up effectively unemployed for a while, and then did what is a very routine story. I walked into a recruiting office, asked to join the parachute regiment. The sergeant who recruited me tried to persuade me I needed to be an engineer. I told her my brother's a paratrooper, I know what I'm asking for.
Oh, wow.
And then, applied. It took, from what I remember, about 6 months to start basic training. The parachute regiment is an incredible unit for a foundation, as a career I moved on, but for me it was my foundation. It was a brilliant place to be. The Marines and the parachute regiment, amongst the elite infantry units of the British Army. The parachute regiment itself, it's nicknamed the blood clot because they stay very tight knit, and that's inculcated into you, that kind of loyalty and that duty to the unit. And essentially they are the British Army's sort of elite attacking offensive force. So when you're doing that basic, that the secondary phase training, a lot of it is about being out in the field, doing platoon up to company level attacks on hills. And, it's a tough process, but it's very, very good foundation to have. I ended up doing quite a lot of boxing for them as well. That's not necessarily why I joined the Army. And playing rugby, which sounds delightful. There was 2 Northern Ireland tours in there, but that was after the Good Friday Peace Accords, so they were very quiet. We spent a lot of time cordoning off, things in roads that then were identified as biscuit tins or whatever, So, but it was an interesting start to a military career, and the foundations as a soldier were, exceptional. You couldn't compete with them. But I put in for Special Forces selection. And nominally the SAS, went and started selection and passed first time, which is, it's a lot of people don't, but selection is a very, very tough process. I've done 2 things in the British military that have absolutely lived up to their name. Most things you take on end up being a bit of an anticlimax, don't they?
Right.
Those weren't, and that was P Company for the parachute regiment, which is short and sharp, a series of tests, including milling, and your trainasium is a test to see whether you can jump out of a plane or not, jumping off a scaffold into a net. And other types, there's a very famous event called the log run, which is physically extremely demanding, and you have to work as a team. And then selection itself is over 6 months, tested every day. They quickly lose the numbers. Roughly an average of 5 or under % do end up passing. Some selections, they have 0. So
5% end up passing.
And it's one of the challenges of all these special operations forces units, that have such an important purpose in the overall military, and is getting people in to them. No one wants you to fail. They need these units populated. So selection is broken down. They test you physically to the point where you could turn up an Olympian and you're no better off than the weakest person on the course. And that's what they're looking for. They're not even really interested in you as a person until they've took you to the point where they can start seeing your mental resilience. It's really useless to start wasting resources on so many people when actually, so once you've proven that you're mentally resilient enough, and that ends on endurance march, which is, I forget the actual distance, but it's huge distance. Once you've done all the marching, You go into the jungle and get tested. That's a very, very hard environment to be in. Very challenging. You know, we train for every environment. And you need to be very, very disciplined in there. You know, everything wants to eat you in the jungle, and most of it's not very big. So it's very uncomfortable. You go to bed after dark and you get up before first light. It's very, very humid, and the jungle by its environment, it's oppressive. It's, you know, everything's making noise. You can't really see ahead of you more than 20 foot. So it's a great environment in order to test an individual's ability, not only individually how strong and how professional, but also can he work with other team members. Key important part of selection is to identify those that can work as a team. You can be brilliant, absolutely superb,
right,
better than everybody else, but if you can't make that work with everybody else, then you're not going to be much good to any military unit, to be honest. Then you go on and learn all your skills, all your various skills that you'll then have to take on. In many senses, it's like, you know, it was my university. I did some A-levels, but didn't do anything else.
How old were you when you first went into the parachute regiment?
So I was a bit older, which sounds not. I was 21, so that sounds young, but it wasn't.
But you can join as early as 16, right?
So you can join junior para at 16. So it's not, you can't get used as a soldier.
Oh, okay, got
but
it.
you can train and adopt all of the good culture that comes from being in the military. And some people do, you know, and some of my colleagues had become through junior para and all they'd known was 16. I'd say that, you know, I had an advantage because I worked in industrial roofing gangs, had a bit of life experience, came in, and it definitely made me look at the training in a different light. You know, I was like, these people aren't trying to break you, right? It's like everyone says they are. They want you to pass. They're trying to identify the skills that you carry. Have you got the characteristic attributes they need you to have?
Right.
And they're not succeeding in their job if there's no one left at the end, but you have to meet certain brackets and parameters.
What specifically are they looking for, like mentally? Or?
So mentally strong,
Yeah.
the ability to take decisions, but also listen to others, you know, so but when you need to make decisions, lead others, but also support others. You know, and that's very, very important what we do. We're given nominally positions to lead, and sometimes someone has to just step forward and do that. So they're looking for all of those characteristics in there. They are looking for soldiering skills at a certain standard. They can't teach you from new, but that doesn't mean you couldn't make it as a medic. In fact, one of my friends was a medic, was an infantier. Now, generally, infantiers from elite regiments used to do better. That doesn't necessarily hold now. But generally, you know, but it's open to everybody. You know, the SAS, since its inception, has been, if you were good enough and to a certain extent you have a background we understand, then you're welcome to come and try selection. So in the unit, you've got mainly British people, but you've got many others from different countries, and that gives it a real strength in its diversity and who it takes from. You know, you don't necessarily want in our special forces a whole group of Marines or a whole group of parachute regiment. You need some, but you need other skills and other ways of thinking coming in as well.
Right.
So that's what gives it its strength, its ability to recruit widely, and its ability to, you know, sort people out. And, you know, if they're starting to drop the brackets and letting people into a job that then is, you know, the limits of what you will have to do in your job can't be negotiated. You know, they're set. And, you know, so if you start dropping the standards of what people have to demonstrate and achieve, you're only putting people at further risk. You
Right.
know? Many won't manage to keep up with it.
For people who may not be super familiar with the British military and the different tiers of military, what is like a comparison of the SAS, the British SAS, into like American forces? What would that be equivalent to?
So, first of all, the British military doesn't have tiers. The only way we mention tiers is to provide a comparative example. But our mission sets actually cover, because a tier represents a certain mission set that you're suitably trained to do and given. So our tiers would be the highest levels of Special Forces USOCOM units, but we've worked with every single one of them. And, you know, and especially with RARC in mind, we work side by side, and in many ways learnt so much from them. You know, we weren't necessarily a suitable special forces unit to take on some of the challenges that we were then posed in some of the latter Iraq tours. We learned quickly off each other. We certainly learned a huge amount off them, and adopted some of the TTPs and tactics that they use, which probably protected us in a way that we wouldn't have known how to. So it's acted as a catalyst, being able to work so closely together. And we don't share anything, but we work alongside each other as partners. And certainly from my perspective, in the British military, that's been invaluable in our evolution as such into an appropriate military force in the present day. But we're good at various, we're very, very strong at certain other factors. So I think we did learn off each other.
So is it similar to like SEAL Team 6 or something like that?
Yeah, similar to SEAL Team 6, yeah.
Okay. So when you joined the parachute regiment and then you applied to go join the SAS, and that is, you said 5% of people get through that? In general,
so I mean the figures and the statistics, but in general they expect a 5% pass rate. Now if you get a 10%, that's really marvellous, but it's very much, the more important figure is how many people can you get onto that course in the first place that are suitable. No point in getting a whole load of people who are never going to make it to the end. And to be honest with you, selection is very tough, right? You should only get 2 goes at doing it because there's weight involved in your hip joints, and when you're doing that sort of and it's very, very arduous, in order to test your mind and your brain as to your suitability, you're taken to levels that you shouldn't be doing on a normal basis.
So can you walk me through what it was like during that process, from the first time you went in? I'm sure there was a bunch of guys that were in there for this trial period.
Yes. Yeah,
How many guys were there? And then can you explain what that was like?
So it's well-organised chaos. You go down to a Welsh area with lovely mountains that seem to have bad weather all the time. It's either ferociously hot or you can't see, fog. You stay in bunk beds, staying around each other. You don't know each other. You quickly make friends, but it's that sort of attitude that, you don't know who's going to be there in a week. You make friends to the people who share bunks next to you. I had certain friends from the Parachute Regiment on selection with me, so we kind of hang out together, but every day we start doing tests, physical tests, hills, long marches.
How many guys total?
So I think on mine 240.
240?
Yes, 240 is what they started off with. Wow. That quickly goes down to I think roughly 70 at the end of the first week, which is not surprising because that's when the physical tests, that's what they're doing to it. It leads to a test march, nicknamed Fan Dance. And you see a high failure rate on that. Everything's a timed march. You have to keep up an average speed. You're carrying weight, and that's really the test. And there's no sort of real, very complex things you're asked to do.
Right.
They're all pretty simple, but they take a lot of physical exertion and mental commitment.
And what year are we talking that you did this?
So I did selection 02.
What's that?
2002.
This is in 2002?
Yeah, so I joined the Parachute Regiment 98.
So right after 9/11?
Yes. I remember 9/11 happening when I was in Parachute Regiment doing my drills course. And I remember seeing it and thinking, do you know what, this is going to change everything. And remembering how I joined the army. I didn't join, a lot of people were aware of the army and wanted to do it for a lifetime career.
Right.
I kind of joined it because industrial roofing, it kind of ran out and I looked elsewhere and noticed the opportunities in the army.
And you thought your brother did it, so...
Yeah, so I had enough cues to say, hey, this looks, really interesting, very good. And the army is a great place to be. There's a lot of challenges involved in serving in there, and in particular through certain periods. And we had a very, very intensive operational period. Through my career, I've done 19 operational tours of varying lengths. There's been a heavy weight on Iraq, eight Iraq tours, but a number of Afghanistan tours, a number of classified others. I've operated in areas where, people are fully aware of where we've been, but it's not publicly acknowledged. And operating against the, extremist groups at a national level, and in particular, in northern Iraq, they're threatening to, destabilise the oil market. They were taking over brigades worth of military equipment, and that really compelled people to act in a way. It's still to be decided whether it was genocide against the Yazidis, but it was certainly pretty severe level. So that drove an intervention into there to support the forces that are around it to help them stop their progress. You know, that's a tremendously interesting thing to have took part in. And in fact, that particular period of operations were all down a front line. You know, people think helicopters, you know, you're moving about, you're very mobile. Actually, we were just given an area to preserve over that was one of the most kinetic areas, an area where they're just trying to break through the front line all the time and constantly analysing what are they going to do, where are they going to try and punch through the front line, just to protect the ground that had been won back from them. So, you know, all of these military operations have different types. They're all complex, and they definitely teach you how to be a human being. Yeah. Because when you're sitting in dugouts, and you know the clouds come in, you know you're not going to get any air support. You know, you know, and it all goes dark. You can't really. You're kind of wondering what everyone's up to. You know, where the next threat's going to come from. So you know, it's not always that we're on tremendously supported missions. Sometimes we're supporting others in trying to just manage in what they're doing. And a lot of these forces are civilians that are quickly trained into soldiers. You know, they're not dedicated soldiers.
So 9/11 happens, and then you decide to try out for the SAS.
Yep.
And started out with 240 people, you said, roughly?
I had already put an application in for...
Oh, you had already put the application in, okay.
But I was finishing off my courses in Parachute Regiment. Okay. I do remember hearing about it, and it, you know, it struck me just immediately. You know, this is going to be really, really impactful. And, it, you know, it defined certainly my operational career, which, you know, is it shaped a huge amount of activity in military terms. And, you know, also, you know, I think it'd be very, very complacent, forget, you know, the origins of where that particular attack happened. They're not new. You know, the risk and the threat remains in so many places. And, you know, it's the vigilance of others and us being able to support them in doing that is, you know, Britain is a very small place. You know, it has quite a high risk of terrorism at times. Now, I've been to small countries in the Middle East that have very, very, very complicated domestic terrorist threats that manifest themselves in extremely dangerous situations. You know, these people not necessarily have got degrees, but they don't have employment. They're then easily, you know, influenced into this mind state that everyone else is the enemy. You know, the institution is the enemy. And they're very capable of putting together extremely dangerous and complex problems, which take highly trained people to come up against and solve. So, you know, just, you know, managing and advising, mentoring, training, however it's done, accompanying, partnering, you know, it's the best way to approach these problems. And, you know, there's been a wide array over 20 years. I was operational throughout. And I've had a really wide array of operations that I've done, types of operations.
So let's go back to the recruiting part, where you said that there was 240 people. The first week went down to 70.
I believe 70.
And that was just from the physical stuff, the marches, and then what happened?
And then we had jungle, and it went down to around about 30-ish.
Okay.
And then you drop off after that because you go into minor skills. People are recognised as not suitable, and you end up with your final figure. And then you get posted into...
How many people did it end with?
12 as far as I remember.
12.
Yeah, so I was alongside 12. You know, and the unit is such a busy place that those 12, you know, you don't really see each other that much. You know, you're passing ships in the night a lot of the time. But as I said, the most important figure to note is the starting figure, because they need to keep the numbers up of suitable applicants in order to get any at the end. And sometimes those figures have been down to 130. You know, sometimes those figures have been higher. You know, but you need to have that consistent engagement with willing volunteers. You know, it's the same as the British military. You know, it needs willing volunteers, same as US military, same as any military. It's a professional army. You know,
unless you're Russia. Volunteers. Well, I guess they're willing. The people in the prisons that they're letting out, those people, I guess they would rather go fight than sit in prison.
But some people do it other ways. Right?
So once it got down to 12 people, what were they kind of like trying to figure out about you, or what sort of tests were they doing on you then? And
when it comes down to roughly about 35 or 30 or just below 30 it was, then you start going into the real techniques that you're going to need to be able to deliver.
Okay.
So you start working on, CQB, and you start working on team techniques and TTPs, CQB being close quarter battle.
Okay.
So it's all about going into buildings, being able to operate in close confines. You don't cover any of the additional skills then, but once you pass, and that was the 12, they go to their various teams, and then they start learning skills, and then in the unit you never stop learning skills. And you simply bolt on more and more skills. It's like constant education all the time. You're not out working, you're kind of educating, or you're at rest, or you're preparing to prove your currency in order to do the next iteration of operations. So it's quite intensive, and it's so enjoyable, because you're learning all the time, and you're learning new skills all the time. So I was learning all sorts of stuff: how to control aircraft, how to control airspace.
What was the hardest part of that whole process for you?
For selection,
Yeah,
the jungle is designed to be really
the jungle.
The hills phase is really intense physically, but the jungle is the bit where you see people starting to question themselves: am I good enough? And that's what they're looking for, right? There's people opt out, and that's the highest failure rate after the hills. Is people saying, I can't really do this. You hear it. They start talking about something at home, and you just hear it start creeping in, and it's kind of
the cracks start getting wider.
It's not an excuse, but it's kind of an explanation to others.
Yeah.
And then they'll choose. And, what they're looking for, that's a key sort of attribute that they're looking for in each individual is, at certain points, do you come to question yourself too much? Do you doubt your ability to find a way through it? And almost all those people that opt out, they probably regret it, probably.
Were you questioning yourself at all during that process?
I had a sort of fairly simple approach to it.
What was your approach?
Which was just like, I'll either get injured and I won't be able to do it, or you're carrying me off, but it's up to you to fail me, right?
Right.
Or you can fail me because I'm not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you take all the self-choice out of it, and you just get on with what you've been asked to do.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be easy, right? So it's not going to be comfortable.
Right.
You accept all of that. You just go for it every time. You do your best every single time you turn up. And resolve that it's their choice to decide you're not good enough. Then it certainly removes some of the mental pressure. And believe me, all these courses are designed to make you question yourself because they want to see how you react to it.
What was the perspective of you and guys like you after 9/11 happened? Was it like, did you guys feel like a strong pull to go and fight in Iraq and do all this stuff? Or
I think, at that time, the British Army had been doing operations. We were very, very close to US forces. No one felt like this was just sort of the US had been attacked, and certainly over the collective military, we knew what was coming. But we had very, very good relationships built upon history and legacy with units we ended up serving alongside. And certainly, it impacted us, whether it could have impacted us as high as some of the, you go from New York and just the physical impact of it, and then the country. I'm not sure, but, it wasn't that much different in our perception of what it was and the fact that it needed to be confronted.
Was it weird? Did you guys feel like, oh, we need to go help the Americans fight? Or did you feel like, well, this isn't our war to fight?
No,
maybe?
There was no element of it's not ours.
Right.
I think people were, there was no resistance to it at all.
No resistance
to it at all. The realisation there's a group out there that was that level of threat, got to that point where it could do that sort of thing, and it couldn't have, been controlled in the ways it had been beforehand because it wasn't new. None of these things are new. They just metamorphose into something else, another life.
Right.
The fundamental sort of basis of it, you can never really get rid of. So there was definitely not anyone that was disputing at all it was a shared challenge. How it would fall out in terms of responsibilities was unclear to us, but we know we were very closely wedded to US forces. We had very good working relationships. We had, so I think we generally assumed that we'd be as involved as anyone else. And Iraq got shared out into operational theatres, and the UK's a small but very effective army. But everyone faced their challenges, and military operations is no such thing as getting it right. You have to have a continually evolving strategy. They're complex scenarios that kind of sort of evolve in front of you. Very, very frustratingly so at times, because you think, hey, remember, a lot of this is done on the perception, a basis of how will these people see us if we act like this, if we do this, when we first went into Iraq, we were extremely popular, and that's because they weren't unhappy that the regime had been removed so quickly, but there was a void behind it that then changed the atmosphere. And by 2 or 3 we were mainly responsible for preventing the descent into civil war. There were people in Iraq like an artful person called Zarqawi who knew exactly how to play on people in Iraq, knew exactly how to play Sunni off against Shia, and large bombs getting driven into Shia markets, and killing many at a time, and they were happening on huge frequency. And in order to stop, and that was designed to get the two to descend into a civil war.
Zarqawi, he was one of the worst ones, wasn't he? Where was he from?
So he's Jordanian.
He was Jordanian, yes, that's
he's,
right.
In prison.
Was he the guy he got let out of the prison when the new leader?
Yeah, he was formerly in prison, but he was he's known as a pretty low-level thief.
Right.
I'm not sure what his background into prison was. He was noted as being a particular type of person whilst he was there. But these people evolve, and this is why there's real intention in all our prisons over, there's a lot of recruitment going on in there. There's a lot of influence going on in there. So jails are incubators, unless they're really, really, really well managed and conscious. But he went off. I'm not sure quite what he did in terms of groups and his affiliations, but he popped up in Iraq because of the type of person he was. He was clearly very influential on the others around him.
Stephen, can you pull up a picture of Zarqawi?
Oh.
Zarqawi.
All right, let me.
You'll be able to find him. Sorry, you can keep going.
So I mean, he created havoc within absolute havoc.
Right.
And again, it's very, very challenging to try and bring that under control, and it underpins the security of the whole place. The whole place is not going to work if the whole populace is set into identity groups and set against one another. And essentially, people like that were a large part of the work, trying to just keep their networks involved and suppressed to a point that they could no longer be as effective as they had become. And that process happened very, very quickly.
He was trying to team up with some of the organizations in North Africa, wasn't he?
Yeah, so I mean, that's the trouble as well. They're very good at, running association with each other, living off each other. In fact, Zarqawi became so, so the Al-Qaeda main HQ communicated that they didn't support Zarqawi in the end because of what he was doing. They're saying you were setting off bombs against civilian population regardless of who you saying they are, and we do not support that. We do not so even he got disassociated from the main period because of what he was doing. But he was very successful in doing it, and it took an enormous amount of energy, focus and effort, intelligence gathering, reactive operations in order to keep that under control. And it's not just Zarqawi there, it's a whole network, including who was driving the bombs, who was training them, who was equipping them, who was resourcing, all of that. But one of their key methodologies was that. But of course, these are much more complex than just that one single act. You've got the financing, you've got all sorts of other stuff around it that's giving oxygen to that network.
Right. What was your one of your first operational tours that you did?
Well, the first two were with the parachute regiment, but then my first with the unit was Iraq, and I had a sustained period of Iraq again and again and again.
And it's correct me if I'm wrong, it's 22 SAS, is that right?
Yeah.
And what is that? What's the significance of 22? Is that like a?
So it's just full-time SS. So
22 means what? Was that just how do they? Is that just like an organization?
No, I don't even know where it comes from actually.
Oh, really?
But yeah, I mean the SS is born out of World War II. An incredible group of people.
Right.
They did make some documentaries about it. They're amazing people in a time where the best was drawn out of them, and since then the SAS was sort of pertinent, and then it wasn't, and then Malaya happened. So Malaya was jungle operations, so enter the importance of jungle in selection. And what they realised is operating a jungle is extremely arduous. You didn't even see people for weeks, and it's extremely arduous. And those gentlemen there, some of who've sort of come back and talked to us, and it's a real privilege hearing a gentleman I heard, I think he's 82, and his recollections of their operation in jungle were absolutely incredible.
Really?
Because there's a pressure on operations, they were pulling people in very quickly from other units. And it just shows how humans can step up when they need to, right? When the requirement to do things.
Yeah, I just didn't know. I didn't know if there was a specific reason for the numbering before the SAS.
No, so I'm afraid I don't know the history.
Okay,
of it.
gotcha.
I mean, I know where the regiment was founded and broadly how it went through. I don't know where 22 came from.
Right. So your first couple operations were in Iraq.
And then a long operational career. Following the trend and path. As special forces, you get involved in a lot of operations that are classified, and they're rightfully classified. You work in sometimes in a covert nature.
Do you work with the MI6, or did you?
You work with all partner agencies.
So you worked with partner intelligence agencies and
yes,
under
covert.
I mean,
that's the only way this works, right? And that doesn't mean physically on the ground. That and we worked with partner agencies across the board. We even work with our police on counterterrorism in the UK. It's important if this is it's an intricate problem. Networks are involved in finance. Finance happens in every other countries. So they regularly result in criminal investigations. In order to influence networks, it's not just that sort of local act on the ground forward that's effective. In fact, that's really just a very key driver to the information that is provided to others to be able to act. So yes, we worked with all partner agencies as we needed to. We worked with law enforcement agencies if we needed to. And and essentially the construct in the UK is quite unusual because it's quite a small place, and each has other constitutional laws. We're able to work with our London Ambulance Service, our London Fire Brigade, in an interagency response to certain levels and types of problems in the domestic theatre, and that's something key that we have to do, and so the military is allowed to support the police if in the event of the fire brigade going on strike as well.
Right. So I assume like you guys are the highest level. What were you guys chasing just the biggest bad guys in Iraq? And
it doesn't really work like that. We don't see them as high or whatever. There's different dynamics that you have to identify in how to make these complex operations successful. So if you're looking at a network, you look at how it's structured first. What is the thing that it depends upon most? Finance always. How are they financing this thing?
You all right?
Yeah, I was throwing away a can.
Oh, okay.
How are they financing this thing? Where do you cut off those themes of finance? So it's not actually just about the level of the senior commander.
It's not just shooting guns.
No, it's very far from knee pads and guns. That's the problem, right? It'd actually be much less challenging if it was just like this one person that you could sort of make ineffective.
Right.
And his network doesn't work. It's not even his network. And these things are very, very complex environments. It's particularly complex when that group is homogenous to the population that surrounds it. So broader operations become very, very dangerous. Some of the units I have the highest respect for are those units that were holding ground, trying to provide security in areas, because they were under constant attack, and they were under the challenges they went through. A lot of them are very, very young people, right?
Yeah.
They've signed up, you know, they're going to do 3-4 years, and they did 3 or 4 of the hardest years, you know, and that all comes at quite a great deal of cost. And there's a big difference between a professional soldier trained through filters and filters and filters in your conditioning and someone who's, for instance, a reservist who's been mobilised and then is exposed to the same conditions.
Yeah.
You know, it's very, very challenging.
I was having this conversation with the guy that was on here yesterday. You know, we got talking about like the difference between young kids who go into the military and guys who just know what they want to do. Yeah. Right, like guys who walk in and say, "I know I want to be SAS, Special Forces." Yeah. I've met a lot of guys that have been in the American military, and I recently had a guy who was in the British Army as well, that were really young when they decided to go into the military, and they went into the military because maybe someone suggested it, or maybe it just seemed like a fun idea, right? And they didn't really have any purpose in life yet. They didn't really know what they wanted to do, and the majority of them come out of there really psychologically destroyed.
Yeah, it's a great challenge. And remembering militaries for periods of time really don't do anything but deter others, you know, and they remain capable and they train very hard. But sometimes they aren't operational for periods of time. But in periods where intensive operations are happening, that's pretty critical, you know. And a lot of these people, you know, a lot of people who join the army turn out to be the most impressive people you ever met.
Right.
They walked in off the street because, you know, there was an absence of something else to do. That's getting less and less as it's becoming more and more, it's a smaller number and it's more professional all the time. But, you know, it's those sorts of people that, you know, either condition very fast and adapt to it, or the whole process does take its toll on them. And that toll is, you know, it goes on for generations. Yeah. And I just had a really interesting, I had lunch before I came here, and it was in a restaurant at the bottom of a hotel. I noticed the guy serving, he had Semper written on his chest, and it was just visible on the corner of his shirt. And so when I was paying, I said, "Oh, you know, when did you leave the military?" I was in the military. And he was, as always, really humble and really engaging. And I said, "Oh, what do you do now?" He's left 6 years ago. And he said, "I do this main role that is my everyday job, but I work this bar work more because the other one pays for it." And it's because he's engaging with people all the time. And somehow intuitively, he knew that, you know, as you leave the military, it's very, very tough. He'd clearly only taken the job. So he was interacting with others. And he had that period of his life that he built in that period of his life that was clearly his tonic. So, you know, it's funny, some people intuitively get the way to do it. You know, social engagement is a very, very key part of it. Right. But it sort of left me because, you know, I don't know whether he had any basis or, you know, some guidance that was the way to do it.
That's interesting.
But he, you know, he very, very quickly highlighted, and it's very humbling when you meet these people, right? You know, he was actually Marine Corps. It's just incredible when you come, particularly when you've been in for 15 years and you come across these young people, and their approach to it is very, very intelligent. Yeah. You know, and the thing is called allostatic load. It's the measure of pressure. So if you go into a special forces community, that's a given. You know, there's no change to it. You're on a rotation. It's got a tempo. It's not necessarily measurable. To a certain extent it is. You know, you can see the risk factors, you can number up the explosives you set off, you can number up the times you've not slept well on the night. Whereas for other forces, it's sort of, they're less conscious of it. And so the thing grows around them like something that is a spectre that is not understood. And it can lead, if people leave the military having had that happen, and it's sort of been chewing away at the edges of them, but there's no awareness of it and what it is. That's when it becomes very dangerous to people. And
is there a moment you can remember in your early career as an SAS guy that was like, my life's never going to be the same? A moment that like really changed you?
So I don't think it has anything to do with the unit I was in. There's plenty of soldiers have to come to terms with the fact that your mortality is on a different line.
Right.
And I say, if you picture living in a fob and having to go and do the same patrol route 5K every day. You know, you have to condition yourself in a way no one in other professions would. But you're not uncomfortable in doing that. You know, it doesn't stop all those physical feelings. So yeah, on a number of occasions I've come to terms with the fact that there's a much higher level of risk. Wasn't necessarily, you know, I don't think you become scared of whatever may happen to you. All of the normal feelings of anxiety around it, you know, of course you do as you're going anywhere. And, you know, we go into completely non-permissive areas where everyone around you is not necessarily going to fight you, but they're definitely not going to act in your favour. You know, they're helping other people who would intentionally harm you. You know, of course there's levels of anxiety, but that's, you know, part of the performance bit. I think the way you manage it is condition yourself to higher levels, and you know it is happening around you. Some of the soldiers I spoke to in infantry brigades, you know, who've done tours of Afghanistan, and I've got a friend who's bilateral amputee. So you know, you get really good insights from these people and the levels of courage they demonstrate in going out and doing their job every day. You know, you can't live with uncertainty to that degree all the time. So you do have an expectancy, you do have an acceptance that you can come to terms with. You know, of course, experiences stay with you for the rest of your life, not necessarily like in detail.
So there wasn't one like specific moment that really stood out to you.
I know I've had plenty of times when
many of them. They all
that's
culminate.
gone off or that's fallen down. You know, and we've had houses fall on top of us and stuff like that. You know, so
what was your most difficult operation?
I can't. So if you think that
that you can tell us, can you walk us through
6 months? I did on one particular trip we did 182 operations. I cannot remember an operation from start to finish.
On one trip you did 182 operations.
Yes. So
is there one that just sticks out to you?
No. So there's various recollections of stuff that pop up, you know, and then they're usually when someone has been caught up in something and we have to rescue them, you know, and essentially, you know, that's what sticks out. They're the more unusual scenarios, but you know, nothing particularly sticks out. Some of the things were extraordinary events in extraordinary situations, and a lot of that is in classified space. It's discreet, it's sensitive. You know, I wouldn't go into detail about those areas. They're extraordinarily complex. You know, if you're in a position where you're relatively unsupported, you know, that's really challenging. You know, you're surrounded by people you not necessarily can trust for a very long time, and you know, and a couple of times that's proven to be just right. You know, and people will try and take you if you leave yourself exposed too long. But you know, essentially, it's been decades of work. I can't pick out like just nominal things on him, and like I say, I can't remember one operation to the next. You know, you have picture recollections of this and remembering, and all that time you've been acting at a level, you've been exposed to all of these different explosives. You know, you've had so much that makes you probably not be able to be like, because I think you can picture, oh well, on that night this from this point, and this was the intelligence picture we had. It's simply not the case, right? I'm thinking about it now.
Have you heard the story about the, I'm sure you have, the SAS guys that were captured and taken hostage, and then the part of their team went in and rescued them, like, against the country's wishes? Like, I guess, like, the government said they didn't authorize it, and they went anyways and rescued the guys.
So I wasn't on that, and part of it.
Do you know any of the guys who were?
No.
No? That was a pretty incredible story.
Yeah. I mean, all of them are incredible stories, right? You know, hostage rescue is a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
You only hear about when it goes right or wrong. You know, it's worn at the...
There's no almost.
It's worn at the political level. You know, and how you plan for a hostage rescue is completely different from anything else. You assume a lot more risk. You know, so I'm more than happy to talk about nature of any of these types of operations. None of which any in their own uniqueness stick in my mind. You know, I remember a house falling on top of me. I remember someone, you know, ambushing us from the side. I remember plenty of context around that. But that's
What happened when the house
happens.
fell on top of you?
That was an explosive device that was set off. The percussiveness of the round, it was dried out TATP, and there was a contact at the door, so an engagement in between. So they were stuck in the doorway. The percussiveness of the round set the charge off. It's a homemade IED, obviously, and the building itself, the building structure was damaged on the side. And about 2 minutes after, because we still hadn't got our wounded back from that particular engagement, the house fell on top of them. And in some, they were left buried for like 4 or 5 hours and resulted in earthquake-type injuries, So, again, these are very complex operations. When they get complex, they get really, really difficult.
Where were you guys?
I
can't say
that, no. No. But those are the sorts of situations that, you were faced with. You have to pick your way out of them. On that particular operation, where, there's about 13 guys left standing on their feet. The other 28, number dead, and all the rest in hospital, So, but that's the cost of going and confronting people that are about to go and do something else.
Yeah.
Again, if you condition yourself for the mindset of that, we train and prepare for it. But these
the 28 guys weren't your guys.
So we were supporting them.
You were supporting them. Oh, okay, gotcha.
So but none of these. The vernacular around military operations is not helpful. Like a surgical strike is not surgical, right? So there's a lot of talk about the preciseness of it all, and yes, it is very precise, but it's still a weapon. You're still going to an area where you're going to get contested in some way,
right?
On a number of, on a significant minority of occasions, sorry, not always. There's other ways we work, where. On the British mainland, where we train and we're surrounded by the people we're surrounded by, there's no threat to us. But the focus is a threat for terrorism. Mumbai scared everyone. Mumbai, I don't know whether you remember the Mumbai attacks, where 90% of all the people got killed. No, it was about 70% of all the people got killed in the first 90 minutes or something.
When was this?
So this was back in 2005, maybe, and it was an attack in Mumbai, done by extremists trained across over the border in Pakistan. They got in boats and came to Mumbai, armed with explosives, grenades, weapons, and everyone across the world, I think, watched that attack and thought, how will we respond to it? So we fundamentally changed the way we would respond to those sorts of marauding attacks that, most countries have seen now. And those weren't things that were happening in the past. It was kind of a new way they learnt how to do things.
And were you a part of that or no?
No, it's just something we learnt off. So any of these attacks that happen worldwide, we look at them and we analyse them. And we say, okay, well, how we're set up, are we effective against it? What are the proper responses we could do? You've seen them in, the knife attacks now. Gun control is very, very tight in the UK. It's one of the biggest defences against, marauding firearms attacks, but it doesn't stop people getting knives, blades, petrol bombs and everything else, and these are the dangerous attacks that everyone fears.
What are the gun laws in the UK? What is
So it's very, very tight. We've always had very, very tight gun laws.
So
and the accessibility of weapons and ammunition means that it reduces the likelihood people are going to be able to get weapons and carry out marauding firearms attacks. But that still means very dangerous people can potentially get them or potentially get other weapons, as has happened in the UK. I mean,
is it how tight is it compared to the US?
Oh, it's completely different. As in, there's no law of ownership of gun beyond, I think, a shotgun and a 22.
So you can own a shotgun and a 22.
Yeah, for various purposes.
And you have
range
to.
Or
so it's like Canada, I think. I think Canada's similar to that.
Yeah, and in a way, because the UK is a very, very complex, dense population.
Yes,
very, very mixed population. It's an island, which is great, but it's very complex. And like I say, we have a very close interagency response, like fire service, ambulance service, all trained to go down and rescue people when it's actually still very threatening for them, in order to rescue people from the underground. But that's a coordinated response, and it's very, very, carefully measured and practiced. But it's foremostly, was adopted after Mumbai.
It says most handguns have been banned in Great Britain since the Dunblane school massacre in 1996.
Yeah, so okay, well that's
wow.
That's the reason.
So has that had any effect on like mass shootings?
Yeah, so I mean, really, have we ever had mass shoot? We do have mass shootings in the UK. I can't think of anyone that's been terrorism. But we do have an adequate response now for it,
Yeah, because here it's like, it's there's been terrorism. There's been like it was the San Bernardino. There was that one that was terrorist, but a vast majority of the shootings in the U.S. are just like psychologically disturbed kids.
Exactly, and that's the danger, right?
On
and this is,
antidepressants.
This is what, I think, these countries, the people that are in them don't really realise the level of attention and the level of praise some teams should have, and it is those young, easy to influence people, who get in a bad state. They're reading a diet of social media, the offered narrative, all of that sort of stuff, and they get into a mindset that, all of a sudden. And actually, no one talks about the many, 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 many of them that are saved, because there's like an attentive content moderator that says, okay, well, these posts are looking like they're going in a certain way, and then passes it over to the authorities, who then go and get the due processes, get legal processes to be able to intervene, and they'll catch it early and they'll get hold of the individual. It's called prevent in our areas, and stop this happening, because that's the sad decline that happens. And when you take it, and again, that's one of the domestic problems, is when you've got high levels of unemployment in some of these countries, and people feel like, they deserve more. I've got a degree, and yet I've not got the job. They become very, very vulnerable.
Yes.
To people who know how to influence people very well. They turn them, give them sort of an ideological route to go down, and the outcome can be extremely dangerous once that goes. And in this day and age, we live in a fascinating world where information sharing is there, and it's open and it's free.
Yeah.
It's monitored. It's monitored by companies. It's unsurprisingly monitored by anyone that can, in order to identify that sort of stuff. And and again, I just make the point that so many people actually get picked up by content moderators. They get reported by school teachers. They get, flagged up. Jails are monitored very, very
But you never
closely.
hear about that, though.
That's the problem, right? You should.
At least in the U.S., you don't.
But the diligent people who've been overlooking this got the due process to actually go and intervene and do something about it, and been able to take this individual into responsible hands and look at it and say, okay, well, do you actually pose that real threat? Now, in the UK, there's a lot of knife crime, real lot of knife crime. And it's very, very difficult to ascertain when someone's talking about it and actually intends to. Therefore, do they present a threat to the public, or whether they're actually just
talking shit?
Yes. There's lots and lots of clever ways of looking at that and assessing it.
How do you assess it?
Professionals. Well, it's not my field of expertise.
Okay.
But you look at this and you say, okay, well, I presume, what age is this person? Who are they sort of trying to pass this message to? But the key point is the large majority of it is exactly as you've said. It's these people that, left unattended, they could well go down into that dangerous bracket. But at the point they draw some notice, they're not at that dangerous point. And they can be turned around. They can be sort of intervened on and said, look, you're looking a bit these last 3 posts, these you've reposted this.
Right.
So these are vigilant content moderators, that will flag something up, because that's what they should be doing. That's their professional responsibility to do it.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is parenting too. It is a lot of shitty parenting here in the U.S. Just people that just want to have kids and they don't want to raise kids. Right? They're not fit. They're not mentally or physically or socially fit to raise human beings. You know, and that's the root cause of a lot of the most, the worst parts of America, like the homeless problem, like, you know, the drug problem, like that. There's this guy who I've had on the podcast called his name's Mark Leda. He has a YouTube channel called Soft White Underbelly. He's in LA on Skid Row, and he does interviews with like prostitutes, pimps, drug dealers, like all of like the most down and like worse off people in America. And you know, he was on here and he was telling me, he was like, the one common denominator between all these fucked up human beings is just terrible parenting.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest and best way of doing it is to, you know, provide a safe and stable and happy home for a start, and people wouldn't go that way.
Yeah,
doesn't mean they won't have teenage problems. Let's face it, you know, like
of course,
get a hard time at school.
Yeah,
you're going to have some of those issues, but it's certainly not going to be left to incubate for someone else to jump in and influence. Or worse, it's just perpetuating conspiracy theories. You know, it just pollutes people's minds. You know, it gives them an impression there's something to worry about that there's not. You know, and that's the problem, right? They're exposed to this in an equal vein. You can go on to the same platforms and research the most incredible topics. It's not the phone in the hand that's the problem, right? It's not the accessibility to the information that's the problem, you know. So, but I totally agree. If you're a parent and you took a real view on like ensuring that your children were guided, like parented and supported, you know, and gave them a feeling. A lot of my friends tell me about sort of, you know, their daughter came to see them because someone was, you know, putting a message up, and that's like the good news. Your children should be confident enough to come and bring things to you and say, what on earth does this mean? You know, why is this person saying this to me?
Right.
And that all comes down to parenting. You can't blame the children. You know, you haven't got a fully mature brain till you're 25.
Right, exactly.
It's not fully developed.
Right.
You know? And so even at 18, as a young person, as we would deem them, young adult, you know, you're still very, very prone to kind of decisions and opinions that you wouldn't make as an adult, like an adult beyond 25.
Right. That's an interesting point, you know, because a lot of people, I'm sure by the time you were involved in heavy combat tours and operations, you were under the age of 25, right? And I wonder how that, I mean, I'm sure the vast majority of people who get into the military are under the age of 25. And I wonder how that affects like your development when you're that young, you know, seeing those kind of things and being under that kind of stress.
It definitely leads to issues that they know fully well about. But, you know, these are great experiences. Let's not ignore the brilliant processes you have.
Yes, exactly.
Loads of education, formative experiences, and pressure is not the cause of concern here. Pressure in life is quite healthy, but it's a prolonged period of exposure to stress and suffering, you know, witnessing traumatic incidents as well. Let's not ignore the key points, but it's that constant exposure to stress. And yes, as a young mind, but remember, a young body is more capable of actually dealing with it. You know, you are actually more active. Your physiological function is it should be tuning and chiming quite well. So most young people are actually come out of it pretty well. You know, they'll never kind of forget it as an experience. It would have shaped who they are as an adult. You know, but it's not necessarily shaped them in a bad way. There'll be challenges. Right. You know, and going back to the guy I just spoke in the bar. You know, it's just wonderful to speaking to someone and seeing that he'd seen them challenges, and you know, and he's a pleasure to speak to. And you know, he alluded to this. He's like, I knew, you know, I do this bar work, and I was like, oh, got it, right? You do that because that's your social engagement. That's your way of, like, you know, in order, you know, that's very, very key and important. And when we worry about each other, you know, on a professional level, we watch behaviours, you know, and a lot of the time it will manifest in the home. You know, before, you know, but how people behave very much represents their, you know, mental fitness, mental health, you know, how dysregulated the brain has become because of that presence of prolonged stress, which results in constant norepinephrine and cortisol flooding through the body that does some really, really quite surprising things. You know, and we don't fully understand all of this, right? You know, it creates some sort of inflammation. You know, it keeps your body on a level where it's not maintaining itself. It's not kind of cleaning itself out properly. There's the harmonious balance of all your functions is lost. And that's when you see it, and it's not immediate, you know, but it's come. And what I recognise, I had 2 changes of behaviour whilst I was in the forces. And so
changes of behavior.
Yes, and again, it's indicative. If you look at your behaviour as a kind of marker of where your brain is, so when someone's very, very defensive towards me, I'm not kind of like everyone has a bad day, and I'm not talking about that. It kind of indicates why are you why are you kind of backfooting all the time? It's like what's going on in there. You present negative thoughts all the time. This is a firm indicator of dysregulated brain. There's something going on neurologically up there that's not there, and left unattended, it will slide into depression, social isolation. Suicide ideation is definitively attached to this in this decline. And we actually get taught a lot of this. I did the police hostage negotiation and crisis unit course, which is absolutely wonderful place to be. And not only does it test you to sit there and talk to people that really make it hard for you to talk to them, you do a lot of study into mental health and people with challenges and how to manage people who are in crisis. And it gives you a real insight, and I find that fascinating and possibly the seed to some of the stuff that I'm looking into now. But the soldier community, the military community as a whole, their allostatic load, everyone has got an allostatic load. Your allostatic load is the levels of environmental factors that are adding stress to you. Everyone has one. With SF community, it's really kind of at exceptional levels. You experience subconcussive blast, the stress of continually sort of turning up and performing. Right. The stress of being on standby all the time. You're always on call. You're like there's lots and lots of different areas where that allostatic load becomes a whole factor. Right. But that doesn't mean to say the military is full of human beings, right? Everyone is human at the baseline, and they're affected by these stresses. And so you look in other units, it's equally as relevant, right? It's just particularly definable in the Special Forces community. Right. And I think the learning and the progress into this is huge. But the trouble is, when you've got neurological dysfunction, it's mystifyingly hard to tie down, diagnose. There's so many different influencing factors in it. Right. So I think it's really... the US is a long way ahead in its knowledge of this and programs to really understand it, and mitigate, when that stress is really inevitable.
How many guys that you've worked with in the SAS or any other parts of the military have wanted to stay in the military and keep doing operations?
So I think everyone would.
Everyone would.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
But life changes around you. People have families. The conditions around it. There's a lot of injuries. There's a lot of people who just get worn out. There's no reason. We keep ourselves very, very fit. It's one of the main mitigations to some of the other damage that gets done and the maintenance of it. But essentially, and I think everyone would stay as long as they possibly could do. But some, it just becomes completely incompatible with outside life. People make their own decisions. There's a lot of high rates of separation in all militaries, special forces units, because you're required to go away a lot.
You mean separation, like spousal?
Separation from spouse and everything else, But a lot of those relationships may not have worked anyway. Again, it's those factors that you can't. It's too easy to just turn around and specifically put the job as the single unit of fault every single time. That's not, but it's a key part of the pattern, the context. Right. So many other professions suffer the same thing. That's certainly not unique. But I think, when you start, everyone would love to stay on as long as they can. People want to be operational. There's lots and lots of training jobs. There's lots of jobs of extremely high value that don't mean going away on operations or anything, especially in this world, where you've got so many domains of military effect as such as part of an overall strategy. They've just declared cyber was the fourth, space the fifth, now industry's the sixth. So,
but don't a lot of guys that come out of the military or retire from the military, don't they go back to be part of special operations in other parts of the world, at an older age? I know now, in Ukraine, I know there's a lot of like veterans, like U.S. veterans and special operations guys that are like up there, like in their 50s, that are going over there to fight.
So there is a network, and to do security is a very, very broad word. So what you're talking about, some do. The people who went over and supported the Kurdish against the Islamic State, one of them was jailed in Turkey. He made a fundamental miscalculation, and he ended up being regarded as having supported a terrorist group himself, because that particular portion of the Kurdish, the Turkish deem are a terrorist organisation. So you have to be really careful exactly how you're going to be perceived by others when you do it. There are a lot of people that go on and serve alongside others willingly, and many for very, very good reasons. Personally, I'm not. From when I left, I said, I want to orientate into a different career, a different sort of opportunity in business. And also, a lot of people become very high level security. You have to have an SIA license in the UK for this, and I've let mine lapse because I really want to engage and be useful somewhere else. So yes, there are a lot, and how valuable they are in their contribution, I think differs greatly. And I think there is always a danger that it's always been what you've known, so you're just going to keep on doing it.
Yeah.
And, and essentially in my background, I've got people I've made promises to as well. And that stood up when I had a duty to do them. Now I'm going to do it willingly on my own volition.
What do you mean?
Just because. So, when I've got people that depend on me for stuff, and, whilst you're doing a duty, that's,
yes, right.
That's obvious, right? It's non-negotiable. You're doing it, and you're doing your job well by doing it.
It's got to be harder for guys that don't have families. Guys who are just single and they have no one.
I think it does go very differently, and I think, but also there's a risk if that becomes your only way. Remember, you're getting older, a chance to build a full life, because the military is a full life, but it's very directed down a tunnel. I'm not sure quite how.
That's a good way of putting it.
You're not exposed to all of the other parts of life.
Right.
And when you leave, you have that opportunity to do it. It's remarkably a healthy thing to do. I was talking to a legal guy in tech not long ago. He simply couldn't get his head round that I'd done a career for 23 years and I'd stopped. And now I was going to learn to do another one.
It's rare, right?
Most of my friends have been with their same company for 21, or at least in the same industry, 21, 22 years. It's not rare amongst us, right? People choose certain paths, and my path has been get out, engage, find, go embrace opportunity a bit, go and explore whether that's going to suit or right, and add some value where you can. But if you're not proving your fullest amount of value, there's a next step down the path to make. Keep on engaging, you'll go there. Other people do choose to do security orientated jobs for the rest of their time, and they're extremely well paid, but they mean long periods of time on oil installations. A lot of oil installations, you have a very big pertinence in running the security that guard them, and there's lots of jobs that fall there.
You said oil installations?
Oil and gas industries.
Okay.
So obviously they're in very remote locations. They need some security being doing. So a lot of ex-members go into those sorts of industries. And I've kind of elected, I haven't ruled out, but I've elected to try and engage in, what I'm involved in now, and learn and adapt to become, almost go into another whole career. So it's just your personal choices. There's no right or wrong in any of it. And people are content with what they're content with. For me, I want to build that life back around me.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not sentimental in my outlook on that. It's not like I feel I owe anything or anything. I just think it's going to be better when I'm 55 or 60 that I've done that. And I'm sitting there with all of that bolted together. And that, means precluding certainly better paid work, but it means, which would mean 6 months, a year away, living away.
What was that quote you said, I think before we started recording, you said something about nostalgia?
Yeah, the ancient Greeks. So,
Well, yeah. What did the ancient Greeks say about nostalgia?
All I say is there's a reason the ancient Greeks regarded nostalgia as an ailment. And what they're trying to say is don't lean back on what you knew before. You know, and I'm quite careful and disciplined to not do that, you know. So and that's smoothing as I move further away from the military in time. You know, I think transition window it's not even in your first step until you're 4 years clean. You know, you're 4 years gone from that career, and you're just starting to adapt and behave in a different way. You're changing your mindset to single duty purpose to kind of.
That's an interesting quote, man, because when you think about people who are getting old, a lot of them just like to reflect on the past.
Yeah.
You know, they don't really focus on the future as much as you think young people do, right? Young people typically generally talk about the future, and really, really old people who, whether they've done a lot in their career, their life or not, they typically all reflect on the past.
Yeah.
More often. That's interesting.
I've asked myself a lot, what did they mean, you know, physically lean back or whatever. And I think it is that. Just don't let your brain sort of linger
Atrophy,
too much.
right. Yeah.
Linger too much in the past, you know.
Right.
Get on, new experiences are very, very good for you.
It's a way to stay young.
Yeah, and learn more things, right? You know, try and learn a new career. You know, I think, you know, soldiers that do transition, they tend to bounce through jobs quite routinely until they settle. And it's because they get put in a position where they get offered a job, they can provide some value, but it doesn't really suit them as a character, as a person. And increasingly they're able to select as they're going along, but it doesn't happen by magic. There's no way you're going to come out of a 23-year career in the military and suddenly go and find a job.
The post office.
That's like, wow, I'm going to do this for 10 years and this is going to be absolutely amazing. And I'm so excited to tell everyone about it.
Right.
You know, and it is a process of sort of navigating your way through. I think the art to it is to engage and, you know, and really sort of grab opportunity and be mindful of risk, but don't let that be the defining factor in it.
Right.
You know, there might be a bit of a bump. You might get a bit of a loss.
Now,
you might have found out you're not very good at something.
Right. So you were telling me off air a minute ago, how many operations and tours were you a part of total?
So it's the figure. So some of them were posts, some were tours. I count operational tours in a theatre where there's counter-terrorism operations going on or whatever. I did 19, and that amounts to roughly about 13 years in operational days. So that's a huge exposure to experience, you know, and you know, and it's all really just a blur now. And I've quickly moved on beyond it. But it was, you know, a tremendous experience whilst it lasted. And that was whilst it was my professional duty to do it. You know, it's not like I linger for it now at all. You know, and in many ways, I'm just grateful. You know, my operational marker was don't miss one, right? And that doesn't mean I put my hand up for it. When I'm asked, I'll go. You know, there'd have to be an exceptional reason. So I'll cover this a bit later. But you know, when just for my third Iraq tour, my mum was hit by a car. Killed, very, very bad injury. She went underneath it, so fatal injuries. Declared dead in about an hour and 40. And obviously that turned my family completely inside out. My father was very dependent on my mum. He actually died 13 months later, just through pure stress. But I deployed 6 weeks, I believe. Again, my memory's fuzzy, but it was pretty close afterwards. I went and deployed. You know, and I got stuck in. The operational tempo was very, very high. And on that particular tour, it was like 180, in excess of 180 operations that we were involved in. And essentially, you know, I proved that I was valid. You know, I got commendated in certain ways, and I was doing my work well enough. I finished that tour and came back. Well, I came back with alopecia, and had I known what I know now, I would have attributed that much more closely to, you know, okay, well, it's interesting. Human beings can go on a long time. But that, you know, my mum's death would be described as allostatic load. Right. And it is stresses from your professional environment, but also your personal environment added up, and how that compounds on an individual. You know, and alopecia was definitely linked to that. You know, at the time I was, you know, I just put it down to diet. I even remember it kind of getting noticed because I was sort of too tired to even notice. I didn't, to be honest with you, I haven't really ever paid too much attention to what I looked like. But I was having my hair cut, and I remember the hairdresser saying to me, "Oh, you poor boy," which is like, one, I found it really interesting. She called me a boy, but I think remembering back, I was about 25, so that's probably a fair one. It's just yeah, exactly. And then obviously I'd started developing these perfect circles in my beard, which are still there now, and they come and go. And that was just dates back to that period where obviously like long-term stress had just kicked in. Wow. And I was performing at a very, very high level, constantly turning over, out, back in, right, making decisions all the time. You know, at my age, it was almost a privilege to be able to do that, you know. Everyone wants to work in a role in an environment in their industry where they're challenged and tested. And you know, you can be proved that you were good, you were effective, and right, you know, and especially at that age, you know, that was important for me. But I returned, and my body was trying to tell me something. But I continued.
That had to have been brutal, man. Losing both of your parents within
it was very tough, right? So very, very tough.
And you said your dad passed away from just stress?
Yeah, well, you know, the medical term is a broken heart, and right, what that is you know, I don't know what killed him, but he described how he would die, right? And he used to get up very early in the morning. He used to have a cup of tea with my mum, and that was his sort of darkest period of his time after my mum had died. So, and I remember going back and speaking to him because I was obviously working on some sort of medical attachments that we do in order to practice our medical skills. Drove home very early in the morning and found him in the kitchen. I was chatting to him, and I just remember sort of looking at him and just going, you're hardly holding it together, right? I looked in the fridge, and there was just some fish lined up and some tomatoes. But he was, you know, he's really struggling to live even domestically. Right. You know, he was keeping him good. I mean, my dad was a pretty talented man, right? He's a competition sailor that he built his own boats.
No way, really?
Yeah, so he's built his own boats. He's a really incredible person. So, you know, but he just simply wasn't managing. And he said, you know, when I get up, that's that toughest time, and it's almost like there's a pain. And of course, what he's describing, and you know, what I would assess is there's something called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, and when you're deep levels of stress, immediate grief after bereavement, you know, and other forms. So financial stress can do this to you. Separation of a loved one can do this to you. And you know, and he had a massive heart attack, you know, and he fell over quite violently. You know, he's obviously really, really big. Now, what Takotsubo is for some reason, and medical science doesn't know why, but it was found in a post-mortem in the 80s in Japan, therefore Takotsubo. So Takotsubo means octopus trap. And for some reason, the long stress, particularly pronounced through to grief or whatever, stuns muscles in the heart. Oh, wow. In one chamber alone. I think the right or left atrium, whatever it is, it makes the heart look like an octopus trap, which is why they called it Takotsubo. And what that does is, in most people, it wouldn't be a problem at all. You know, that would be you would return to normal. And unless you have other really quite severe heart preconditions, it usually wouldn't really sort of affect you. But clearly in his case, and if it was that, you know, nothing was found in his post-mortem, you know, and toxicology and everything else.
Wow, yeah, first discovered in Japan in 1990.
And just because, and the heart goes back to normal either naturally or obviously after event of death, it will do that the same. Because you haven't got that effect back on the heart. So,
right.
You know, we don't know how many people are, you know, have been fallen victim to that.
So you can't diagnose it post-mortem.
Yeah, but what I do know is, you know, they've identified the mechanism of it. So if you're bereaved and you've got central pains, you shouldn't be too surprised. Don't be overly concerned. You know, this thing just goes back to normal in the vast majority of cases. But for some reason that we cannot put down, or at least I've never read an explanation for it, is this stunning muscle on the left side. I'm sure it's left side, maybe left or right, but one side of the heart that compromises the heart's function a bit, and it interferes with its myocardium, so its rhythm. So, you know, that's a period of risk, and I do some sort of closed speaking stuff, you know, very rarely. But when I do it, I really enjoy it. You know, it's lovely closing the doors and speaking to people, and you know, meeting people, and you have to prepare for it, which is brilliant. It's an all part of research and everything like that. It's all very important.
So
sorry. The point being is the title of that is a unique perspective for the challenges we all share. What I say to people is like, you know, human stress is inevitable. Pressure's, you know, a natural cause and actually very good for you, but human stress is inevitable. You know, when you're listening to this talk about sort of special forces and military, this all sounds very exceptional, but there's not one person in this room that will not be bereaved at one time in your life. You know, it's highly likely you'll know someone close to you that's going to suffer a pretty challenging illness to treat. You know, there's highly likely you'll end up separating from someone. That's will be a pretty, you know, brutal experience whilst it goes on. You know, and don't be surprised that this is hard. You know, it's your approach to it that is absolutely critical in how you emerge from it. The emergence from it is not going to be quick. Yeah, we're talking weeks. You know, people think they've moved on from a death in 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. 3 months. No, it's not anywhere near. You know, it's like that will be affecting you for the next couple of years at least.
Right.
If not, you know, it will have a legacy behind it. You know, but physiologically, you'll return to normal. You know, and everything, but that won't be quick.
Was your dad and your mom together for like how long were they together?
Yeah, very decades and decades.
Decades,
30 to 40 years, I think. Wow. Yeah. So they were, you know, they were really amazing people. But then I think most people regard their parents as that. Yeah. My mum was extremely hard working. She ran 3 jobs and a mum to me and my brother. So she was an architect and did something called milk recording as well. So milk recording is, you know, when they manually milk the cows and they had to record how many hands. So me and my brother, when we were young, used to get put on a mattress and driven to a farm. I wake up on the farms very early in the morning. It's a very cool way of growing up. And I remember taking the big silver urns of milk back and all that. So my mum was tremendously hard working. You know, she's the sort of person that got up at 4 a.m, did some architecture before the day started. And, you know, what happened to her is completely unpredictable as a shock. You know, my dad used to say, you know, I've got to shout goodbye to your mum, but never got to do anything else. And that was tremendously hard for him, you know.
Right.
And, you know, and he was physically very, very fit. They didn't pick up too much in the post-mortem. They picked up some normal stuff that you'd expect. I mean, that's the key point. You know?
Right.
I was still going on operations. I didn't stop, you know, but looking back, my body bit back, you know, and slight adaptation of behaviour then. Yeah. The second period of time was, you know, we're into our 9th, 10th operations now. They're highly condensed together, and I had a really quite pronounced change in behaviour. And that's from a cumulative. It's not just down to one thing.
And how do you notice these slight changes?
For me,
are you constantly going through like psychological evaluations?
Well, consciously, I'm aware of how I behave, to be fair.
Okay.
And if you know, everyone gets a bit depressed every so often, that's very different from depressive. But depressive is a mechanical sort of process it's a decline. It's a increasingly dysregulated neurological function. And that's what I'm always consciously aware of, you know. Get up and have a bad day, that's like everyone else does. You know? It's up to you to just make someone else have a good day and it will change. But what I'm saying is I'm very conscious about, you know, negative thoughts creeping in, which indicates that kind of sort of I'm not particularly in tune. Another thing that's very, very important to realise is if you have been down into those pits of stress that lead to these challenges that you face, you know, the route out of it, if it goes to clinical level, one, you'll need professional intervention. You know, there's no way you can drag yourself back out of it using just the processes available to you, which we'll talk about. But, you know, it's going to be a long process back out. There's a process back out, and there absolutely is. But you're going to need some help. Whereas if you identify these periods of stress and mitigate them before they get there, you're probably never going to go down to that line. And that can be very, very challenging if you're doing a profession like Special Forces soldiering, without a doubt.
How much attention do they pay to your mental well-being when you're in the special forces?
A huge amount, right? So, I mean, we're consciously watching each other.
I mean, not just you guys. I mean, are there other people, other doctors around you that are evaluating you?
Yes, we get extremely good medical support. We're slightly less metric than others. Now there's algorithms you can do. There's various stuff that measures your cognitive abilities. Can identify cognitive decline, can measure a change in mindset. Now I've been out of that unit for 3 years, so I have no idea what they're doing now. And it's I don't look back in and go, what are these things that you're doing?
Right.
So whether they are using them, I'm not sure. At that time, the best defence we had is looking, watching each other and know each other. And if you see someone behaving slightly differently, and a key one is getting all defensive, it's like slightly, everything that they're doing, they're acting in a defensive manner. That's probably the first indicators that, they're out of balance, they're going off tilt.
Yeah.
This is a slide. Now that might have been an accumulation of factors. We did intense periods of training with explosives used, and everything else. And you're subjected to the blast in each and every time, and the blast reacts in different ways. So you never really predict how hard you're going to get hit by it. We do close quarter combat, so there's overpressure from barrels. This is all part and nature of special operations forces community. So, it's almost a foregone conclusion. The subconcussive blast results in brain shearing. So brain shearing is a slight agitation between the grey and white matter of your brain. So the grey matter is where all of your dendrites are. So the white matter is where all the axons follow through. So they're the communication channels with its myelinating sheath, and they appear down and communicate to the peripheral nervous system, which is where you get all your stuff. When you're constantly exposed to blasts, whether it's mortars, artillery, explosives, all of that sort of stuff, you get that very kind of minor concussive effect that results in that slight shearing. Now, this can be detected in the blood now. This is very, very new. And I believe it comes from the US. And it's called neurofilament light. So if you can detect this, it's sort of had the term brain dust. Then it's different from someone who's boxed or played football, whatever. The mechanisms are slightly differently.
Interesting.
So if you
How are they different?
So I'm not quite sure because contact sport, it results in...
There's a difference between getting hit in the head versus dealing with some sort of explosive
It's a blast.
blast.
It's like a pressure more than everything.
Yeah, right.
The mechanism's slightly different.
That makes sense.
Now, it's interesting that boxers are more prone to this than, say, MMA fighters. Certainly all types of fighting. And again, it's an interesting one because do we want to take contact out of sport? Well, no, of course not. We can't take contact out. We stop being human. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, the impetus is to measure the risk, measure the exposure, responsibly put measures in. So the exposure's in that point of competition.
Yes.
Not in the training unnecessarily. But then also, and again, I use every measure available to you, including technology, to mitigate it and promote your own physiological function. Because what's inside you is your best defence.
Yes.
So, and I think we've got to a point now where people are responsible, and they always have been for the people that are doing duties on behalf of them in professions, in sports teams, in anything. Personal choice in there, but that's part of the contract and the deal. Right. By now not measuring exactly what the exposure is and kind of taking on the risk, and mechanisms are getting put in place. This is all quite new. Again, one of the problems is neurological function. These conditions are extremely difficult to diagnose.
I want to go deep into this stuff, but I got one more question about the combat.
Yeah.
So when you guys leave these programs like the SAS and these high special forces divisions, is it normal for you guys to have to completely scrub your identities when you get out of there? Because I know a lot of guys, we were talking a little bit before that a couple of guys that had to do that. Why would they do that? And how normal is that? It's
just, it's personal choice at the point where you get out. There's no guidance on things, but it's personal choice. It's what you want to be comfortable with. Again, in transition, people may not be fully comfortable with You know, it happens in phases rather than anything. You know, and you can talk endlessly why people aren't comfortable about that, but it's really a personal level of approach, you know, in everything that you do, what you choose to do, and everything else.
And why? So, like, what kind of blowback do you get when you leave the military, or what kind of blowback have people like yourself gotten once they've decided to retire?
No, it's not really about blowback. It's really about, you know, for a long period of time, you've been in a very classified environment.
Yes.
You know, you will not have social media, and you've been completely contained to your unique purpose that you're designed for. You don't share anything. You know, why would you share anything? And essentially, when you get out, it takes a little bit of time to unwind that in your head and become comfortable with it. So, you know, for me, it was like, okay, well, I'm going to step and I'm going to walk down this path, and I'm going to get involved in technologies, and I'm going to get involved in careers, in industries where I'm pretty much learning from the beginning. The question remains, am I ever going to adapt sufficiently?
Yeah.
But that means engaging with the world on a flat level.
I'm like, what I'm trying to say here is like people like you who retire from these forces, how worried do you have to be about your safety? Like when you're traveling the world, or like people that like enemies that you've dealt with in the past trying to come back and find you, or stuff like that.
Places you'll travel to, if you take those sorts of roles, present a lot of risks.
Yes.
You know, so I think people are very mindful of that, you know, until you're sure where you want to go with your life, and whether it's going to include those travelling to certain areas that may be risky. That's probably why they control it to a certain extent. And they, you know, you want to do it on a measured basis. How you want to engage with industry, society, everything else.
I guess name changes are pretty common.
There's no standard to it, right?
No.
People
Okay.
make personal decisions on it. There's no standard to it, you know, and you know, and there's essentially a lot of it is defined by what you want to do when you go out. You know, for me, I'm on a flat panel. I'm on an absolutely flat plane. You know.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I know where I want to go, whether it works out that way. But you know, it doesn't make any difference to me.
Do you feel like now that you've been out for 3 years and you're in civilian life, do you feel like your head's on a swivel, like hypervigilance, always have to be looking over your shoulder? Did you have that in the beginning, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the key behavioural things that I manifested, and the second time I had a bit of a time sort of spiralling back up. And again, I was working all the way through, so let's not like, you know, I was conscious of it. Was you know, hypersecurity awareness, you know, which other team members noticed. And it was constantly looking and saying, okay, well, you know, doing assessments on risk and security, and a kind of neuroticism about who I was sort of engaging with, who gave me their number. And that's a completely dysregulated brain, right? You know, when you're kind of assessing too much and trusting too little, then your brain has become dysregulated. Now, in that work, of course, you fairly assess everything you do.
Right.
But in that particular time, I noticed it within myself. And I wasn't comfortable. And I was like, and this is not like me. This is not by character. I'm not like this. So that's the bit I ended up finding myself. I didn't intuitively go, this is what I got to do to solve it.
Right.
But I pulled my way out of it. Like I say, it wasn't affecting my work. I didn't disclose it to anyone. And it wasn't affecting my work to the extent where I was, you know, not effective. And even not pleasant enough to work with.
Right.
You know, but it became a dominating factor in everything I did, you know, and that's just not me.
Right.
You know, that's just a sign of a dysregulated brain.
Right.
All the neural function is going at that point. If you leave that unattended to, whether it's down to lack of sleep, lack of nutrition for periods of time, just like piled on stress, or whether it was accumulative over the years, whatever it was that led to it at that particular point, and it was over a few months, and I'd say it probably to reverse the whole thing to, you know, who knows, because it's where's the line, but
Right.
over a year.
So how did you end up getting into this world of neurophysiology and working with NASA and DARPA and all these companies?
Yeah, so I work at the moment employed for a satellite company. I'm probably moving industries quite soon, but it's been a pleasure to be in the space industry. It's an incredible place to be. Whether I can prove to be of really high value every day in there, I'm not sure. That's one of the problems of that adaptation. It takes quite a lot of time to learn, but I've had I'm really grateful for the people and the experiences I've had since I've left. And when I've needed people's help, I haven't asked for help, but they've given a lot of support, which is fantastic. It's like, and I've noted how much people are prepared to support you in what you do, but it's up to you to keep on moving on. So I'm not saying I'm staying where I am at the moment, but I was trying to get on a course at Imperial College because I identified I needed to educate to make myself more relevant in certain fields. And through a gentleman who is the head of the Institute of Security and Science and Technology, Professor Deep Channa, he, on a walk round of a place called the iHub, introduced me to Richard Statham, who's the CEO of MES Group AB. So he invited me in for a demonstration. I had a demonstration on the technology that they've developed. Well, I haven't developed technology, they've innovated with a trusted technology, which I'll come on to. Having tried that and experienced it, I was put through a few gaming scenarios where, people jumping out and sticking swords through me, and then I had to sort of battle my way through towards a radioactive nuclear core. And essentially, the technology puts stimulus through your musculoskeletal system and neuromusculoskeletal system, and but immediately I picked up on the benefit, and I'm not interested in stronger, fitter, faster. I naturally actually was perfectly physically capable of doing my job all the time. A little bit extra certainly would have been welcome, and if I could potentially have done my job better. But essentially, where I saw the potential was kind of in that real kind of promotion of all that physical function, which is so important to keeping yourself stable and balanced. Through my career, there's definitely a neurological deficit. There's something I'm attending to. It's not going to quickly go out into disarray, but I can't take my half it.
So what was this technology? What was the purpose of this technology? What was the end goal of it?
So the purpose of the technology is to be used. So it's an old technology used in medical therapeutics, like TENS machine. It's the same sort of family of technology as EMS. But they've developed over 8 years a unique membrane. An incredible membrane. It's about paper thin, has unrivaled abilities to take information from the human body. It's got super conductive, and deliver stimulus in. The stimulus in artful waveforms that have been created by someone called Vincent Tellenbach, who's a Parkinson's expert, who's got 30 years experience, just under 30 years, I think 27 years experience of writing these waveforms and working on this in this area of expertise. And he's an incredible person. He's got a legacy of working with Kennedy Krieger Institute and John Hopkins, and that's probably, if you wanted to pick the most crucial and valuable elements of the whole piece, because it's a number of technologies all put together. It's probably that knowledge to write the waveforms themselves, and the unique membrane. But also in that team's a lady called Dr. Victoria Sparks, who's a neurologist, physiotherapist. And then a number of others. There's a program manager, Vedi. So it's a very small team, but what they've achieved over 7 years is really, really incredible. And what they've done is took old and trusted technology and gave it applications in almost every area you could think of, because it's a human application. And your musculoskeletal system is your gateway to a happy, healthy and probably longer life. So tensioning and torsioning your musculoskeletal system is the most effective way of regulating your brain, without doubt. You have to still stay to the.
You're talking about the muscle that is like the closest to your bones, the skeletal muscle.
Well, in every end point of a muscle, you have a connection with a neuron. Innervated muscle, and they appear at the top of your bones. But the whole muscle is, when you voluntarily recruit muscle, so when you pick up a dumbbell, your recruitment is however much it needs to be in order to do that.
Right.
When you put stimulus in, you can design a waveform to stimulate it in various ways.
Got it.
So in the program I've got on my phone, because I use this suit, not every day. And again, it's wrong to talk about the technology like this as a habitual thing you need to do. You can do it in phases, you can do it in programs, but it's good for an approach to using over a period of time that you want to train. You can train without it if you want, and it's a technology that will adapt to what you want to do, or you can follow a program. But essentially, it's putting that physiological stimulus in. It's optimizing the promotion of other physiological functions through that innovation and stimulus onto the musculoskeletal system. Now, inside you is your most promotable elements. You've got your blood-brain barrier that is very fussy and quite individual, actually, in every human being. What can't be argued with unless there's a genetic issue with you, which can be identified. So if you can promote those functions, all the more better, recruiting the muscle and getting stronger, but also promoting those hormones, the secretions of hormone and extracellular vesicles that sort of cross cells that move between, cross molecules that move between cells, and promote them up into your brain in a more effective way than you can do by voluntary alone. Then that is going to have a very good effect on other core elements of your physiological function. So these are where I've become extremely interested in technologies, not just the fact that by using it you can achieve the stronger, fitter, faster, the fat loss, the cardiovascular health, whatever, every element of fitness that you want, the technology can be used to promote. But essentially by stimulating your musculoskeletal system. So when I describe the musculoskeletal system as a gateway, and you probably need to include neuronal in here because of the latest research from the University of Illinois is definitely indicating that innervated muscle is more effective at promoting these hormones and secretions of extracellular vesicles. That's your gateway as such. And what people tend to sort of go down the line of is, well, it's one padlock with a key. No, it's not. It's a combination lock. And some of those combination numbers are good nutrition, good sleep, healthy balance in your social existence, including good relationships or whatever. All of those are absolutely key factors. You need to remain on those pillars. But one of the most effective ones you can actually directly influence, and that puts their numbers in bold, is that stimulus onto your musculoskeletal system. And we recently did a paper for people involved in spaceflight, the space community, relevant to institutions like NASA and ESA, and gained their attention very, very quickly. Because what it is a technology that can be put into almost any garment. The membrane is unique; it can be rendered into any garment. And we haven't stopped innovating. We're looking at various communities that definitely have challenges.
So this stuff could essentially be implemented into like astronauts' spacesuits, and
only they could ever say whether that is feasible or not. But
is that why they were interested in it?
No reason why not. Well, there's no reason why not. So I think with any technology, even a non-invasive one, and a wearable and a trusted one, you have to look at it. You have to ensure that it's doing what you need it to do for your particular challenges. And the spaceflight community are a really interesting lot because they're the very epitome of humans going beyond their biological limits in what they aspire or need to do for their professions.
Right.
And it's absolutely stark. And once you go into a microgravity atmosphere, which you're not well adapted to, the decline is extremely quick, and it's very, very hard to mitigate that damage.
You mean that you're talking about like bone density?
Mainly muscle mass and bone density.
Muscle mass and bone density.
Once you lose muscle mass and bone density, you start having a compromised endocrine function and physiological functions in concert. All this needs to be harmonious, right? It's all as important as each other.
So one of these suits that you could wear with these devices that stimulate the muscle could essentially mitigate the bone density loss and the muscle mass loss.
So there's a number of ways you can promote bone density. So nutrition is always there as the first one, but not necessarily the most effective. And then you've got, the go out running, and that's called that's piezoelectric effect. So as your heel is hitting the floor, your body turns the mechanical force of that impact onto the floor into electrical charge within your iron gateways and promotes it into your bones. So that promotes bone density. The problem with impact, of course, is
stress.
Over time it will impact your joints, but that's not a good reason to stop doing running. And certainly, running is one of the most effective ways. And the third one, I mean, there's other minor ones, is tensioning and torquing your musculoskeletal system. So the stronger your muscles are and the stronger their contractions against the bones, that's developing that bone density growth effect as well.
Right.
And what's important in this is not just that bone density is really, really important, but there's a lesser known hormone called osteocalcin, I think only really identified in 2004, that lies within the bones. Osteocalcin.
Osteocalcin.
Calcin.
Okay.
And so even the bones are really important in your other physiological functions within your body, including your neurological function. So all of it needs to happen in harmonious concert. None of it is going to be, if you're training but not eating and sleeping, it'll mitigate it for a bit, but you'll end up in a bad place. If you're eating, not sleeping but training, the whole thing has to be looked as a number of disciplines all put together. Right. Socialization, music, all of these are key aspects of ensuring your neurological balance. Right. Another way of looking at it is emotional stability, right? So how you behave, your emotions that you display in reaction to the things that are happening to you, that's core to indicating on how healthy your brain is working, how fit it is, right. How mentally fit you are. If you're out of emotional balance on everything, or you're acting like basically a stone to everything you come across, that is an indication. And then going back to my changes in behaviour in number 2 phase, that's what I've become really. And I was not emotionally sympathetic to anything. It's like that can be quite hard. And it's not. Sometimes people say, "Oh, well, that's what you've got to be in order to continue to do your job." Right. And that can almost be a bit of a misnomer. Yes, it is. Of course, you're controlling yourself emotionally, and you're not going to it's not going to be a good thing to go down into a sentimental pool of whatever else. But not being emotionally intelligent around how you behave around other people is also not indicating a good level of mental health, right. Mental fitness rather. And I deliberately call it mental fitness because you have the ability to change it, right? And through all of those stimuluses in your other functionings, promoting physiological function, promoting brain-derived neurotrophin factors, so neurotrophic factors, nerve growth factors that will move through your bloodstream. They'll end up in your brain. They play a very, very important role in regulating everything that happens up there. And, you've got a family of glial cells called astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, and microglial cells. Astrocytes are responsible for expression and they inhibit certain sort of cellular interactions in the brain and key expression and signalling particularly in your dendritic areas, so the ends of the neurons themselves, the end of the synapses. And then you've got oligodendrocytes that rebuild the myelinated sheath that I alluded to earlier, which is, if you take the axon, that's where the signal comes down. The myelin sheath is rebuilt by the oligodendrocytes. That is key to the conductor of the signals that move along it, right? And then you've got finally microglial cells, which are like the brain's janitor. So it goes around and cleans out all of the detritus and cleans out bad proteins that have existed. So if you look at, they've got a key function in Alzheimer's, for instance, and if they aren't performing their role or in any way inhibited in their role because of inflammation or because of whatever else is going on there, and they're really, really not sure about the causal effects of this, but the process is absolutely essential. And one of the ways we are thinking, certainly in my mind, and one of the most tragic elements of Parkinson's disease and other neurodegenerative conditions is they present when physical symptoms are there. That's the last third of the disease. The condition. So when you roll back the clock to maybe 20 years earlier, when that started the conditions around it, where it would manifest. And believe me, I'm not talking about genetics here. There may be a more likelihood of it through genetics or whatever, but the environmental factors that you've experienced through your life are absolutely fundamental in how your brain is shaped. And if you know that you've been exposed to subconcussive blast, if you know that you've bereaved in traumatic circumstances, if you know you've been in a particular managed position at work that's just absolutely, knocked you all over the place for years, you will have preconditions. So we can identify the risk factors at the very least. There's a number of ways in growing biomarkers where you can actually identify it present within the body. And then, what can you do to mitigate at that point? At the moment, they're sticking neural interfaces deep within brains, deep brain stimulators in order to control the motor symptoms of Parkinson's. And at that point, really,
there's things people can do with people with Parkinson's where they can implant something in your brain.
Yeah, so for Parkinson's, where the motor controls, so invasively go into the brain and stick a deep brain stimulator, so a neural interface deep within there that sends out a signal that interferes with the lack of motor control or the motor control. Is
it been shown to be effective at all? I mean, how effective is it?
Well, this is one of the problems, right? So, I mean, that's very, very clever. There's no doubt about that. It's an incredible intervention on an absolutely tragic disease, tragic condition.
Yeah.
But the key point is, if you look at it, it also demonstrates how little we do know. Because actually, through that neural pathway that's affecting the motor in any way, I've heard, in the books I've read, I've seen 2 neurophysiologists refer to it in the same way, as it's like playing a piano with a mallet, right? So you can actually only see a tiny amount of the neural activity that's going on, and you're sending a signal in. But through that same area pathway, there's all sorts of emotional behaviours going on. There's so much else. It's like a whole orchestra going on in there, and actually what you need to do is be playing a melody along it. And the trouble is with introducing an invasive device into the brain, your body, doesn't matter how much you trick it, it'll identify its foreign object in the end and wrap it in a sheath. So that signal will become degraded, and that's a problem, So whilst it's really incredible that they're able to do it at all, and it does mark the progress in medical science. And the practice of medicine, it also does highlight how much further we've got to go, and progress in this area is really interesting. It got deeply interrupted through the times of COVID. A lot of people lost their funding,
right?
But if we can find other ways in which to promote these. So it's sort of the physiological function well before. The overall question in my mind is like, could you have prevented it in the first place? If you really promoted those functions at times of stress, times of whatever else is leading to those neurodegenerative conditions becoming onset, so you can't mitigate them anymore.
Right.
Another tragic element of this is by the time they're visible physically, and they're generally at an age where your musculoskeletal system has degraded slightly, and the neuronal corrections with it have degraded to a certain degree. So those particular individuals are less able to effectively get that beneficial stimulus.
Right. Yeah. How do you detect it earlier?
Exactly. How do you detect it earlier? And even if you can't detect it, but you can identify the risk factors that likely would lead to it, is there more we can be doing with non-invasive wearables? Now, in all of these topics, you can argue till the cows come home, like, okay, to what point are you optimizing them? Is there a change in cognitive ability? That's for people to go out and work with research clinics to establish as quick as possible.
Right.
But a key point with these technologies,
No. I was just going to say, I've become aware of, you mentioned DARPA earlier. I know DARPA, I read this lady, Annie Jacobson's book about, she's a whole book dedicated to DARPA and some of the stuff that they do and some of the research that they've been doing for a long time. And one of the things that they've been focusing on is creating super soldiers. And they've been doing these invasive brain implants since the 90s to try to do things like mitigate pain, like to try to reduce the amount of pain that soldiers can bear in combat, and things like hunger, try to like get past hunger to survive longer without food, and all kinds of things. So it makes a lot of sense that they would be interested in something like this.
Yeah, and I mean, I've just read a book called We're Electric by Sally Adi, which is absolutely just illuminating in so many aspects. And in it, DARPA is mentioned so many times as being so critical in this advance of this research and technology. And of course, a lot of it is done for military purposes.
Right,
you know, military communities are, you know, I kind of got a need for it. You know, the need for human augmentation in the military is a given. You know, the military have a lot of people that are, you know, breaking through stress. So there's a piece of documentation called The Dawn of the New Paradigm, joint piece of work by the Bundeswehr and DASA. And essentially it's, you know, identifies that we should be able to promote to our human biological limits. You know, people aren't doing that. You know, we're not effectively going to our full biological potential. Now, if you go beyond that, you talk about enhancement. So you can take people's eyes and laser them and get them to see in the dark. That's relatively easy, actually.
You get them to see in the dark?
Yeah, so you can just open up the rods so you can see better in the dark. You've used the rods. Yeah. I mean, that means you can see in the dark, right? As good as many animals would.
I thought you meant like give them like night vision or something.
Yeah, night vision's you know.
How cool would that be if they get DARPA? I bet you DARPA's tried to figure that out. Try to make people get night vision in their eyeballs.
Yeah, well, the key bit is, could you do it biologically?
Right, exactly.
You can actually take a laser and open it all up quite a lot, perfectly safely, add more rods in that allow you to see in the dark, and you get better clarity at night. Yeah, night vision's come on a huge distance from when we first started. But, you know, it's hard work seeing in those pictures that you see on, especially if you're doing it over such a prolonged period of time, and then you've got all your different levels of information coming in. The overall load on your brain to interpret what's going on outside it is getting pretty a lot, and it's acknowledged as, you know, a significant challenge that they face. Is we're opening up all of these abilities to sense and surveil and learn and, you know, all this, and be told something by something else. And the human brain is amazingly adaptable, and it can survive. But, you know, whether it's neural,
LASIK,
so neural overload or whatever, you know, everyone talks about now needing to take creating a neurological reserve, even just to cope, let alone to condition. And, you know, NATO's just released their statement on human enhancing technologies, you know, the importance of being ethical about it, but, you know, importance of, you know, looking after the soldier, looking after the militaries, ensuring that their welfare is good, but also their conditioning suits what is going to be required of them, and getting them in a good physical state, good physical conditioning, but also augmenting their biological ability. And there is no reason why you can't do that, right? If you're we can voluntarily do what we can do, and individually and biologically, on a biological level, we're all quite different. You know, we're all very, very similar, but the small differences between us manifest quite big in how we appear and how we behave, right? Yes. So, but using a technology, a non-invasive technology, to improve that conditioning, and it's no good in in the hands of a small set of people. It's effective when you make it available to the whole and improve them by 10%, 20%. Right. You know, quicker in rehabilitation, more conditioned to do their role. If you're having, you know, a lot of back pain, or people falling from a particular condition, like a particular use in conditional to your role, so special forces community, you know, lots of climbing and jumping. Right. Does that result in bad knees? You know, okay, well, we can see that, so we can condition that to become less of become a preventable injury as such. Right. You know, and there was an interesting one we were brought with shelf people who worked in superstores, who were putting things on shelves of a certain weight. They're getting this particular type of problem, and, you know, it's costing the company a lot of money, and that could easily be treated by, you know, the right physiotherapy advice and a very easy and accessible technology. And, you know, the point I made when I come across this technology, what really blew me away, And I must add that I'm not paid by this company at the moment. You know, I represent them. I've become an ambassador for them as I was invited to do. And, you know, I was just taken by, you know, the potential that it offers in so many applications. And and in the use of this technology, you know, the fact that you can render the membrane into anything you choose. So if you take female motorsport, for instance, you know, they don't want to change the suit they spent so much money on development. So you have to make the set of technologies that offers this this stimulus to be able to be rendered into the garment that they use. Yeah, and that makes it quite special. It makes it very accessible. And what struck me at the beginning of being introduced to this technology is, well, one, it's a old and trusted technology. It's got no ethical contentions to it whatsoever. The risks are definable because they're well known. And it's affordable, accessible in the business units. You know, it's the applications that we'll go into. And it can be delivered at effective scale. And that's a key question with technology. It's like, okay, well, is it great? Well, yes. Can people use it who need to? Yes. Can it be made affordable and accessible to them? Yes. And that's a key point in, is this technology effective? So, I mean, that's sort of Emma's Group AB. You know, it's effective in the four lines is gaming. So gaming is very easy. You know, much like haptic, this is a beneficial stimulus going into a body. The waveform is extremely simple. Now, it's a very simple product. And essentially, you know FIFA 24?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you get tackled and you just get a stimulus into your quad that's promoting good factors inside you as well. So it's not only an immersive gaming experience, we just made gaming healthy. You know, so then you've got sports and recreational fitness world, where you've got sort of very focused programs on the pursuit of sports and recreational fitness, which is usually fat loss, muscle conditioning, you know, all of the different pillars of health. But done at a certain level and done in a routine that makes sense to the user. So you can push it out in any model you want, but the safe brackets are written within the programs, you know. So within this older technology, you get something called rhabdomyolysis, which is bleeding within muscles. That's only if you take it to extreme levels or you're biologically particularly vulnerable to that, you know. And I would say that voluntarily you can give us rhabdomyolysis, you know, by overtraining on in particular ways. So so it's not just the technology, and the technology arguably doesn't make you any more susceptible to that, but it's easily definable and it can easily be captured in these programs. So it definitely has applications in sports and recreational fitness, you know.
You brought a sample of it with you. Yeah. Or is this what is this one right here? How does this work?
This is I will mention there's some very artful prototypes coming out. So
just bring it over to where you are.
Mainly this is the membrane. So the membrane is the special bit. The membrane can be rendered into anything. So if it's medical and therapeutic application, is it a knee sleeve? Is it, you know, what do you need? Right. This is a suit that I wear for my training. I've got numerous programs on my phone. So when I want to train and, you know, the stimulus, the particular waveform that allows me to deliver resistance in my muscles, that's what I use. I've used capillarization this morning because it's quite sort of nice.
What's that?
So it just encourages blood flow through all of the area. So yeah, I use it most of the times when I train. It's great because it kind of
what kind of training are you talking about?
Training. So how did I train this week?
Yeah, like when you say when you use it for training, what kind of training are you talking about?
Any training I want to do. So all I do is put the suit on and enhance my training. And that's the art to it, right? It's basically a stimulus that is when the stimulus goes into the muscle. When I voluntarily recruit the muscle, I can never do it to its fullest extent. It's impossible. Muscle's got three types of twitch. You can never really access the slow level of muscle to the fullest extent for a start. The waveforms are very, very cleverly designed that your body won't get used to them for a start. I don't understand the full technical aspects of it because it's like an art form. But essentially it's end-to-end recruitment of the muscle. So it's 100% recruitment of the muscle. Now, if you want to get muscle mass, you adapt your training and the technology will make you more effective in achieving that. And
so you can wear that and you get super jacked?
You can do. I mean, I've never tried, and I don't think I want to be super because it's actually a bit of a disadvantage.
Yes.
But you know, for my part, I want to be as quick and as kind of light work, but I want to be as quick and as strong and as light as I can be. You know, certainly that requires a certain mass of muscle.
Yes.
You know, but this, you know, the different programs, different waveforms. There's a hypertrophy program on that waveform allows you to build muscle mass quickly, right?
Wow.
But the key point, and I'll make a really, really important point in this, is like at no point any of these technologies the panacea, right? You've still got to be motivated enough to get up and train if you're using it for that. You know, you can't just stick it on and it will go. And what we've found through the research is the most powerful way of using any of these technologies. What this is an involuntary stimulus into your musculoskeletal system. It's cutting your brain out the loop, basically. So when you voluntarily train, your brain is moving using all those conscious neuronal pathways, and the motor's going in, it's picking up and recruiting as much muscle.
Right.
But you've got an involuntary stimulus going into
Yeah.
the musculoskeletal system that's emphasizing certain elements of it that you wouldn't achieve, and it's optimizing the promotion of physiological function.
So, like, is there a full bodysuit version of this?
There is some trousers there. So this is a full bodysuit.
Oh, that's okay. There's pants and a shirt. Okay.
Yeah. But equally, and that's the key part, is really it's an innovation of trusted technology.
Okay.
You know, the membrane is utterly unique. The waveforms, you know.
So, like, what are some of the things that if you could put that on and like go for a run? There's something on the phone where you could type in like running.
Yeah, so my phone's over there, but you know, I've got banks of programs, and we've got, you know, a lot more on the bank data, and there's new prototypes out, you know, so we're working very hard on seeing development forward. But essentially, I mean, I stick it on, and I stick it on my abs and my back to strengthen my core and my hinge. That's a resistance program that works particularly well for running.
And so you do that when you're going on a run?
Yeah, and then I go in and do some strength training, you know, and it's not like I'm turning to that and going, you're responsible.
Right.
You know, I'm putting it on and working, it intuitively works the way you train. Equally, I can just put it on a program. So the new programs are dedicated to, you know, they're built for people who know less about how to train, for instance. So it could even go down to telling you how to train if you want it to.
Right.
But most people don't want that, right? Most people want something that is going to help them get to their goal quicker, like a catalyst to do it, and do it better.
Right.
You know, and using a non-invasive technology to do that with your own voluntary and motivated process to achieve that, you know, you're going to get better results each and every time. You know, the conditioning ability of this is tried and proven.
Right.
It's also been used in the medical and therapeutic world for a very long time with bed-bound patients, people who've had muscles that have, you know,
atrophied,
inactive. There's actually a program on that on my phone.
Oh, that's amazing.
You know, so but this is only the basis of where the potential can start. You know, as well, further understanding comes on how harmonious balance in endocrine function, physiological function is attached to that tensioning and torquing of the musculoskeletal system. And the most recent research, as I said, is innervated muscle is more effective at secreting the hormones and the extracellular vesicles that, you know, go up into your brain and boost brain function. So it's a very exciting area. But just on the simple basis of what the suit does, you know, sports and recreational fitness, it's a great technology to use. And actually, you know, it's the same technology you've used. You've seen it, but it's a totally different application of it. You've seen the lumps, you've seen the wires coming out. This has got no wires on it. The membrane is incredible. You know, so that means its applications can be very exciting. You know, and when you talk about sports and recreational fitness, you know, specialist applications are defined by any profession that challenges your human biological limits to do it. So consider spaceflight. You know, you're going into a microgravity atmosphere, they're probably the epitome of the example. People who've got challenges in achieving what they're aspiring to achieve. But also militaries are, you know, defined very quickly, have massive human performance challenges, both in the health and welfare and readiness of all their soldiers, you know, which are, you know, they're keeping up. But the point is, it's not just good enough to keep up. And it's very important to have every human being as ready as they can and as conditioned as they can for every trial they may face. And then you've got medical and therapeutic. And medical and therapeutic is an incredible world where the technology has already been used. And we're going on a trip to Ukraine, and that's kind of sort of a very good exemplar of where the immediate applications of this technology can help incredibly. And Ukraine has got a huge amount of amputees and traumatically wounded people.
Yeah.
So please don't take these figures verbatim, but you're looking at 110,000 or something. It's like, and the levels of processing of the amputees and trying to get these humans back into a stable and social existence, and and a happy one, but also being able to get them back to doing some sort of work, and again being members of that economy, that national economy, is critical. And the challenges are huge. And this is an interdisciplinary area. You can't just give them a physio and it'll all work. So the technology can perform an extremely important role in not only being a catalyst to them going back and getting rehabilitated. They can play a very important role in preparing them for their conditioning for surgery and post. And it can help them condition further afterwards. So if you think about someone who's an amputee, they have got a mechanical disadvantage in tensioning, torsioning their musculoskeletal system, right? So this means that, forevermore they will have a kind of neurological deficit they will have to attend to. The imbalances in physical function and redressing them are big as well. So this is a preserve for experts, and again, this technology can be made available to anyone when they're following a program with conditions built in. But when you're actually treating sort of people with very, very complex injuries, when you're addressing communities with, professional challenges, that's when you have to have the experts involved to inform the process. Analyse, okay, well, how is this immediately useful to them? Where can we prove it can be useful in the future? So, at the end of the day, that trip to Ukraine is all about delivering them a technology that will help them rehabilitate these people that have been conflict affected, and potentially will become, people that will take a massive amount of resource to support for forevermore. These are generational problems. When conflict takes place, it's it's a massive impact to a whole population. Generational levels of problems. You got all sorts, and that's the cost of conflict.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Is this available commercially or publicly right now?
So yes and no. It's moving out to sports and recreational fitness market. I think that they've got the new types of suit ready. I haven't spoken too much about their business plan recently. Medical and therapeutics, it's being used already, but we're working with Imperial College, leads of department in musculoskeletal biodynamics, some other, talking to the NHS about its wide use. The thing with these non-invasive technologies, it takes a long time to prove their data.
Right.
And that's where, from my point of view, you need to differentiate between a non-invasive technology and an invasive technology. Because the non-invasive technology, as long as you can define the risks pretty clearly, and this is an old and trusted technology that's been used for a long time, you should be able to hypothesize, quicker before. And, you shouldn't need that mountain of data, because you can get on with using the non-invasive technology because it's keying into your own biological systems. It takes out that critical point of error. Now, you can't be complacent with it. You need, expertise to advise on all of this, and we'll get on with clinical research and everything else that proves to what extent it improves cognitive ability.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, it has immediate applications in multiple use cases. There's big communities that can benefit from it. People who have become quite obese. These sorts of technologies can be used to help them. When you get to the critical point where you've got to be really, really careful about, how much you do and the stress on your other internal organs. These technologies can be used in quite sort of artful ways in the hands of the right people. And again, it's an interdisciplinary area. No physio should be on their own without a neurologist. And you need all of those expertises come together. And there's certain strength in having a commonality of knowledge in the middle. So when you talk about some of the amputee treatment and rehabilitation, physios are there on their own and they have no idea what's going on in neuronal overload, the changes in neuronal function that's having to go on, and that's why it's important, and especially when you're applying, a technology like this, the benefits really are derived from the knowledge. Again, it's the waveform that does the art. There's decades of knowledge that it took to get to that point,
right?
And again, I love podcasts because they're platforms where you can actually hypothesize.
Yes.
And you can say, why, there is no reason why technologies like this cannot be partnered together, and innovating with their applications and applying them. You can chase further down the path quicker. You can make it more accessible quicker to a large amount of people to benefit from it.
That's really cool, man. That's exciting to see what you're doing and how this can be implemented in various ways to help people maintain or to help people that have been afflicted by physical injuries or diseases and stuff like that. So where can people that are watching this learn more about this technology or this program that you guys have going on?
So they're more than welcome to look up the product. At the moment it's quite a closed off, but it's where I describe them to be is with the right partners. Move quite quickly. I've just been to Soft Week, which was absolutely brilliant.
Yes.
Loved it. I really enjoy coming here as well, and happy I'm not leaving just yet. But essentially, these companies that we can partner with quite quickly and working together in a collaborative manner can get, quicker to the solution. If you can measure brainwaves accurately and you can promote physiological function and measure what you do with it. But again, I emphasise, the nascent nature of measuring what's going on in the brain, making very, very quick progress. So I'm at the moment, go on links, have a look at companies if you're interested in this, and it will start appearing in research. We're working very heavily with Manchester Metropolitan University, Northampton University, and Imperial College. Imperial College is absolutely key because it's got the innovation hub. So this is an ecosystem of innovation, like not just small startups, representation of big sort of primes there as well, and it's quite a special building because of what goes on in there. But you've got this amazing ecosystem, PhD students, startups to SMEs with these amazing visions that they put into practice, like MES, and essentially being used, sort of assessed for their dual use nature. So dual use being applications in civilian environments and both in security environments. And essentially working on all of the really, really sort of key challenges that are facing collective militaries,
right?
Which is all a part of essentially harnessing industry, partnering with academia, and answering some of the challenges that government faces, and government, including the medical institutions. We have the NHS in the UK, which is one of the most precious things we have. But I'm going to argue endlessly whether it's kind of sort of continuing to hold its head up under the pressure. But it's incredible. When I think about people that they've treated that are very, very close to me, I'm just really thankful we've got something like that we can turn on. But they need a lot of help. And drawing technologies, non-invasive technologies that are accessible now. And again, I'll go back to that, no technology is worth talking about if it can't be delivered at effective scale, when people need it. And old and trusted technologies have not got the levels of risk associated to them essentially as new ones. Maybe there's not the data on the way you're applying them. but a different culture and different approach. And, you know, and a lot of the discussions I've been privy to, you can see how people are naturally sitting in their silos. You know, they're some of the most brilliant people you come across, experts in oncology and experts in these fields, but essentially sitting in their silos. And there's some fascinating research going on, much of it interrupted by COVID, unfortunately. But, you know, these companies should, you know, be identified. You know, have you got a usable non-invasive technology that can be accelerated through sort of collaboration? You need to get those interdisciplinary eyes on it, you know, not look from one point from their silo, from their one perspective, but broadly open it up to, you know, the whole point about harmonious function and how you promote those factors. And I think we'll reach the conclusions much sooner, and certainly be able to progress on.
Fascinating stuff, man. Well, I can't wait to see where this goes. It's super interesting to see innovations like this take off. I'll link anything below where people can learn more. Is there any specific websites you can think of off the top of your head that people can go to learn more about this?
Yeah, so look up MES Group AB.
Okay.
And Dipulse as well. We'll give you an introduction to it.
Perfect.
I'll provide my links to you as well.
Awesome.
And you know, it falls under that same subject. You know, let's get going against challenges using non-invasive technologies where they can be identified that they can be, you know, acting as a catalyst.
Perfect, man. Well, thank you so much for your time, man. I learned a lot. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
All right.
Good
night, everybody.